Hi, I'm Valerie Flynn. I'm an author, a podcaster, and a learner. I wrote a book with my writers group called Writers of Meaning, an anthology on community. And I have two podcasts. One is called Writers of Meaning. It talks about anything related to writers of meaning. And then the second one is my own personal learning journey, learning about other learners as well as momentum makers, teachers, creatives, and helpers. And that one's called NAR Fellowship. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today. Thank you.
Hello, I'm John Cuturilo from Melbourne, Australia. I own and operate Your Listener Counselling, host the Your Listener podcast, and write regularly and speak regularly on radio about psychology. I have a history of working with a broad range of clients and presentations with particular interest in trauma, relational concerns and habits. I also have experienced mental illnesses myself, and I combine theoretical knowledge and evidence-based methods with the wisdom gained from my own and clients' experiences to form an approach which is adaptable, person-centered and authentic. On my podcasts, I discuss psychology, critical thinking and social affairs in a unique manner. I eschew politics, rhetoric and lecturing on what to believe, and instead encourage my audience to be more critical and curious consumers of information. I also advocate helping them to develop more detailed, complex knowledge rather than overly simplifying concepts to the extent that they become empty slogans. I particularly welcome collaboration with people who have perspectives which radically differ from mine. Welcome to this collaboration between the Your Listener podcast and Valerie Flynn of the Writers of Meaning and NARA Fellowship podcasts. In today's episode, we're going to be having an insightful discussion about community. We're going to be discussing different subjects within that domain. We're going to be talking about a concept known as estuary, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be hearing Valerie's vast experiences and perspectives on these particular topics. But first of all, we'd also like to remind our audience that nothing that you find on the internet or in the media is advice. So if you do have concerns about yourself or about anyone else of any description, please always consult a professional or someone else that you trust. Valerie, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you. I'm really interested to hear what your experiences are. Where would you begin on this topic? What do you have to say?
My opening chapter of the Writers of Meaning book that I co-wrote with my writing group was about my adventures in community itself. I have personal community, in real life community, and also online community. So I'm kind of involved with both. Both have pluses and minuses. We actually prefer in person because it's the most enriching of the two. But I have visual and hearing handicaps. My family have different health issues and stuff. And so sometimes having an online community can help when one can't actually go to an event or participate in person and go places, whether it be physical or mental disabilities, or it could be like lack of transportation, or it could be just not finding like-minded people near in your neighborhood. So in my little corner of the internet, we call it this little corner, it's called Bridges of Meaning, is a Discord server online, and it was created online to create and facilitate in real life community. And it evolved from a Jordan Peterson meetup into what we now call Estuary. Estuary is basically a small group discussion that is more than trivial chit-chat. It has more deeper, more meaningful conversation to help bond people into friendships long term. And there's a protocol and everything to it. I've never been technically part of the Estuary, but I do help promote Estuary because that's what the book is. It was born from that movement, and also a number of the authors and even the book designer herself are members of the Estuary. And it's really helpful for if there's a wide diversity of perspectives. It's really important that the individuals be grounded in who they are and not be antagonistic to people who are of different ilks, whether they're religious or not religious, whether they be conservative or liberal. They, whatever the different worldviews are, if we if we come at it from what I call intellectual hospitality, it's beyond just tolerance. It's actual curiosity of understanding somebody that you don't agree with. And the estuary has sort of like a roundtable kind of discussion thing where no one person dominates the conversation. It's designed to facilitate everyone being able to speak something. And whatever the topic, it doesn't have to be prepped for in advance. It can people can suggest ideas. People go around and vote for which one they want to talk about, and the one that gets voted in is the one that everyone talks more in depth about. It's been going on for quite a few years. It's a worldwide international movement. People in Europe, people in Australia, people in the US, and English-speaking countries. They're coming together and just having like small group discussions, atheists, agnostics, religious of different faiths, and just talking about more interesting, deeper things.
That is fascinating. So estuary, in its sense, is a word that means that it effectively refers to a specific type of community where there's a specific purpose facilitated through discussion. As you said, there are protocols. It's not incidental in any way. It actually occurs through very deliberate actions of all the members with a very deliberate vision, much like words like congregation describe some people meeting for religious worship, or there are other types. Perhaps dance troupe might refer to people meeting for performing arts. Estuary is an intellectually hospitable group, and they're meeting for that purpose. If the online space is designed to, if that was designed to facilitate eventually some in-person presence as well, some real life presence, how has that happened over the years? Have there been individual estuary subgroups that have happened across the world, or has there been one in particular that meets internationally? How's that happened in the real in the in-person domain?
It's a very organic system. There's a website called estuaryhub.com, which is a place where people can go and find out if there's a local estuary in your area, and or you can volunteer to host an estuary and go through the minor training online for it. You become an estuary host, and there's estuary host training. It's more like a Zoom kind of call kind of thing. The two people who created Estuary, one gentleman is kind of a well-known minor celebrity in our little corner, and his name is Paul Vanderclay. He's a pastor from Sacramento, California. And then his good dear friend John Van Donk, who helped facilitate a lot of the estuary education and awareness of the around the world. There's been everything from small groups in churches and different restaurants and stuff. It doesn't have to be church. It's not church centered or church adjacent. It's just how it was created by a pastor, but it's not meant for to be exclusively church or to be an evangelistic tool. It's mostly to facilitate real discussion, whether it be a Christian or Judaism or other faiths. They have doubts and stuff. It's an open floor to talk those doubts through without being demonized for it, and really wrestle through it intellectually. And then for the atheists and agnostics, it's kind of like an iron sharpens iron kind of dynamic between people of faith and people of no faith, and really wrestling through that stuff intellectually in a very not agreeable but amiable way. The spirit is very amiable. It's very much they can get a little heated and stuff, but it's never a personal attack, never name calling. That doesn't fly. Um, so everything from small groups at either some location or conferences, and there's been numerous conferences both in Europe, one in Australia, and then several what they call estuary conferences or something in the United States as well. There was a big one in Chino that John Van Donk helped facilitate. There was some in Chicago. There's some in the Southeast, some in the Northeast of the United States. There was one, I think, in Sydney. I'm not sure. In Australia, there was multiple ones in Europe and England, and there was actually an estuary tour where John Van Donk and Paul van der Clay and a friend from the Netherlands, Job, who's well known in our little circle, went to different places in the estuary in Europe to different to kind of be guests at different estuary groups. So that everything from small little groups, everything to big conferences and stuff.
Can you describe a typical estuary meeting in terms of not just what happens, but also the protocols that people are expected to abide?
Yes, I don't remember the protocol as exactly, but I remember the essence of the protocol. So first is an introduction by each person, who they are, and what they happen to be thinking about recently, currently. Like it can be political, it doesn't have to be political. It could be like, so for me, I would introduce myself as Valerie Flynn. What I've been thinking about and learning about recently is humility and fame, and how that intersects, especially somebody in the creative world, is you want to be humble, but you also need to build a writer's platform or a creator's platform in order to make money in the industry. And how do you do that without, letting fame go to your head or the pursuit of fame corrupt you? And so that would be an example of something I could talk about in the introductory stage. And then after everybody has gone and taken a turn, everybody will take a turn introducing something they would like to talk about. And, I could talk about community. Like I want to talk about the good and the bad aspect of communities. Peer pressure is a real thing. Everything from just bad negative stuff to addicts getting together to pursue their addiction to organized crime. There's negative things about community as well that we need to be aware of, that we influence each other positively and negatively. That might be a topic example, and everybody takes a turn and talks about whatever it is they're thinking about, or think they would be a good discussion to think of for everybody to talk about. And then the next round, everybody would talk about, well, which of the topics stood out the most to them that they would like to talk about. And if usually it's somewhere between 4 to 12, 13, 14 people in this small group. And then, and then someone's usually a leader. They call it the estuary leader, and they would help facilitate that. And then most people are pretty amiable and they're not voting for their own thing. They're like, that thing over there, that sounded really interesting. I'd like to dive into that. And whichever one got the most votes, that's the one that everybody talks about. I don't remember the actual details of discussion. I think the leader acts as a facilitator to keep things moving, much like a pastor or a small groups leader in a church might do for a men's group or a women's group kind of thing. Same kind of principles and dynamics of trying to facilitate people talking and bringing out the people who don't talk very often and facilitating, helping people not talk too much, monopolizing the conversation kind of thing. And so, there's a lot of finesse that's helpful to have in dealing with that. And then they go through the process of talking about the topic they chose, and that could last like an hour or two, I don't know. And they meet regularly. So they meet weekly or monthly, depending on the group. People just feel more connected, and people start getting to know each other better the longer people come. People will come and go as their schedule allows and their interest allows, but you'll get the regulars, and the regulars will be 6 to 8 people or whatever it might be, and some people come and go and all that kind of stuff. And it just, people start forging friendships and bonds with each other, having this type of interaction and small discussion. It really is very popular among men who really need a network of community about them. It's just worldwide. It's just an epidemic that guys are just not being able to plug into a community. They might plug into like a hikers or basketball or something, but they might not have the deep, meaningful conversations that people really need to feel connected and supported. And Estuary helps facilitate that.
I love the way that you describe that. It really details how the conversation has so much power in itself. It has so much educative and exploratory power. It has the power of discovery in it. Can you recall any stories or relay any, protecting confidentiality, of course, that demonstrate perhaps how there's been some profound change or relationship development through that power of conversation in Estuary? Perhaps maybe an instance where somebody realizes something that they couldn't have possibly realized before they heard somebody else's perspective and realized that they'd been looking at something in a way that wasn't necessarily representative.
I unfortunately have never done it personally myself. I just seen how it's just been a dynamic for the community online and see it, third hand kind of thing. From my own personal experience, I have one friend that I have like a Discord chat with every Tuesday night. She and I would just talk back and forth, and she'll say something that I never thought of, and it changed the way I actually think and do different things in my life. And I think for my interactions with the social media Discord itself, it's interesting to see and hear where people are coming from. That it's not a safe space. It's it's kind of volatile, but it's not poisonous. It's very much, you're going to encounter ideas that you do not agree with, and you just mentally prepare for that, and everything's kosher. Um, and it's interesting in the voice chats they have in Discord. You can have voice chats with people, and I've had numerous voice chats with different people in the Bridges of Meaning community, and it's interesting to hear. It's like there's some heretics, um, and it's interesting to hear like why they think what they do. They have valid reasons, and it's like, oh, I've never thought of that. Julian, one of the writers, he wrote about his experience in Bridges of Meaning and the Estuary. He had real life people that he met from online, and also did Estuary, and also his evolution. He's a Hutterite, and so he comes from a very conservative, community-minded thing, very fundamentalist in his viewpoint, but he's become much more well-rounded. He hasn't changed his mind, but he's much more tolerant and much more like inquisitive of understanding different denominations and non-faith. And the chapter chronologizes his journey in this little corner, as we call it. You don't have to change your view because someone out debates you, but it challenges you intellectually to figure out, okay, they have some very valid points, and I need to think about why I believe what I believe more than just having the talking point that I learned in a book. is really wrestle through this stuff, whether it be political or religious or philosophical or unrelated. Maybe it's a professional thing, like why to use different lights in a certain situation in production work. I don't know.
Most of what we believe is highly distorted. Our minds are not perfect. Then they don't perceive reality perfectly. And our minds distort the information that enters in so many ways and molds that information to our existing beliefs or tries to interpret the world in a way that feels most secure or most pleasurable to us, so that it's hard to actually understand how the world works in perfect clarity and perfect objectivity. And all of us are subject to that flaw. We can't avoid it. It's part of being human. But the problem is also that there is a reality. It's just that it's hard to know all of it. In fact, it's impossible to know all of it. Reality still exists. It's just it's impossible to understand all of it because no one has the cognitive power to understand and be able to interpret every piece of information that comes in with perfect objectivity. It's impossible to actually become closer to the truth without interacting with other people regularly and with that same purpose that you've just described. Academia is nice. Perhaps it provides us with some key knowledge, but just reading books in and of itself isn't enough. They're a great way of imparting knowledge, but they're not interactive, and they still tend to, doesn't inherently have to be this way, but tend to, from what I've seen in academic literature, tends to be relatively overcomplicated and very short on explanation. More verbosity and description, less explanation, less exploration of mechanics, asking the whys of why things are the way they are, why the world is the way it is, why the world works the way it does, why people work the way they do. Only by being able to interact with people and asking difficult questions that are difficult because they're impossible to answer perfectly, but at least worth pondering. It's an essential element to trying to understand the truth more strongly. Without it, we lose something. But at the same time, I'm looking at the world, as I'm sure a lot of people are. We see so many people who are fighting because of their disagreements. We see so many people in conflict, entire nations. All of these conflicts amongst humans can effectively be explained by exactly the same psychology because people are hedonistic and they seek pleasure. And when you seek pleasure, that also leads you to hold to be true those ideas which feel most comfortable to you, which avoid the discomforts, avoid having to acknowledge the realities and the difficulties of life. And the more we acknowledge those and hold them to be true, the more defensive we are of them, because to defend them is to also delude ourselves into thinking that they're true and that the world is a safe place for us, which means also, in order to defend those beliefs, in order to keep ourselves deluded, we have to then actively seek and attack or even destroy those who disagree with us. But at the same time, there are some issues in which opposing ideas can't actually be true. It's just that people of all sides of the argument may not understand exactly what the truth is. Maybe it's what one of those people believes and they just don't know it. Maybe it's what none of those people believes. It really troubles me to ponder that because I can understand why some people fight. Some people are a threat to others, for example, and some people maintain, I don't want to be associated with or be sympathetic to or even empathic to this group because their beliefs, if they were to manifest, could impact me. It could even result in my death or my maiming. But at the same time, so many people have that logic, but they've never bothered to question whether that's actually true. And the same for people on the other side. It's a difficult balance to strike. You don't want to enable, we naturally don't want to enable people whose beliefs are toxic, who could actually cause mass destruction if they were to manifest. But at the same time, we're very quick to place the label toxic or bigoted or intolerable or insufferable on people's beliefs without really understanding, are these beliefs really as destructive as I think they are? Or is it just that I feel that way because their beliefs make me uncomfortable? They make me too aware of something of which I don't want to be aware. And sometimes discerning the two is so difficult. And as I've observed before, I look at so many people's arguments on particular issues, and you sometimes hear discussions in which somebody is beginning to make a valid statement, but then they start to justify it with all kinds of inflated rhetoric, and you think to yourself, you've just lost the argument. You actually had a valid statement, but then the way you justified it, it revealed that the reason you were making that argument wasn't because you genuinely understood it to be the truth. It's because the belief benefits you, and the more people believe it, the more people support you. So it's possible to have a belief that's truthful, but is just being held for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And I think all of us need to try to reach a point where we're holding our beliefs for the right reasons, not because they just make us feel good, but because they might be in our best interest to believe, or they may be in society's best interest to believe, because we have duties both to ourselves and to other people, and there comes a point at which it's not acceptable to simply think of ourselves. We also have to think about how could this affect other people if I was to make it widespread.
That made me think of two different things. I'd like to elaborate if I may. Jonathan Haidt is a writer and a researcher. He wrote Why Good People Are Divided Over Politics and Religion. And he also researched and discerned and learned a lot about what he calls the 7 pillars, moral pillars. And what actually is going on, as he talked about in his book about the conflicts between religion and politics of good people, is basically there are conflicting values that are both valid and good, but they come into conflict with each other, and different people will prioritize different moral pillars will be higher for some and less for others. And he noticed a tendency that in liberal and conservatives, they have different leanings on the different 7 pillars. So sometimes what's really happening is people feel very strongly about something because they place higher value on a certain moral pillar than somebody else is prioritizing a different moral pillar than them. And that particular controversial issue, those different values are coming into conflict with each other. And that's some of the reasons why everything gets so heated and so personal and so intense, is because people's backgrounds, they don't just believe what they believe just because it's convenient. They have experience and they have a history that leads them to that particular belief, whether it be right or wrong, depending on your viewpoint. There is an ultimate truth. I believe that wholeheartedly. I just may or may not be in alignment with that. I think I am, but I like to think I am, but who knows for sure? Being a Christian, I believe that God knows the truth of the situation, and He will judge everything rightly, even when I'm in the wrong. I'll just like, okay, you're the one, but understanding, having the humility to know that I could be wrong. Many people do not have that humility because, as Brene Brown once said, the reason why people are so vehemently antagonistic to whatever is against their personal belief is because their identity is tied up in that personal belief. And it can be very, very threatening. Not only is disagreeing with that personal belief or an idea, but that has been integrated into their very identity. And so you're threatening their identity. And so those are a couple reasons why people can get so vehement and disagree. And also, as Brene Brown says, there is a deep sense of insecurity. The more insecure somebody is and the more vehemently they are professing their belief in whatever it might be, you're actually triggering their insecurity in their identity, and so they can't handle that other people disagree with them. I know people both on the right and the left who are very much of this ilk, and I like to think I know what the truth is. I realize that I'm humble and I'm very limited and finite, finite person. There's no way for me to know the ultimate truth. I think I believe in God and He's the ultimate truth, but maybe I'm maybe it's a very beneficial delusion. I don't know. As a believer, as a Christian, that could threaten my belief if I put my own mental well-being before loving my neighbor. So it's kind of tricky because you're dealing with the paradox of truth and love, and you want to love in truth and not sacrifice truth for love, if because sacrificing truth in the name of love could be anarchy, and sacrificing love for truth could be tyranny. There's another lady who's an author and a philosopher. Her name is Esther Lightcap Meek, and she talks about loving to know. In cognitive science, there's like 4 types of P's of the different types of knowing there are. One is more experiential, one is more procedural, one is more book knowledge, and one is more something else I'm forgetting. It's more physical, like dancing or martial arts or something like that. So Esther Lightcap Meek, she talks about loving to know, and not as an exploitative way to glean knowledge, but entering into relationship with each other and with what you're pursuing to know in a more holistic, less exploitive way.
This will make salient also the importance of community in this entire phenomenon. One of the most important components of our psychology is to have a sense of deciding what to think about the world. We effectively need a guide in our mind, and we have various mechanisms. One of them is called schemas, which are essentially sets of thoughts that guide how we interpret the world. We need cognitive guides about how to interpret the world. We need existing information that helps us make sense of new information that enters our psyche. We also need to decide how to think about ourselves, how to think about other people. We need to make evaluations, or at least we seek comfort in them because they're a relatively definite way to understand the world. If we evaluate something, then we decide whether it's good or bad in our mind, and deciding that helps us to feel confident in that we've made the right judgment, so to speak, or that we've have a grasp on the reality of how we're living and what it is that we're observing. Whenever we don't have enough of a meaning in life, then it violates that psychological need to have decided who am I and what is my life about, and what is my value on this earth. And we can't develop this spontaneously. We have to develop it through experience, which is why people develop beliefs through their life experiences. That's why their background is so important, because when we enter the earth, we do have predispositions, but at the same time, we have to develop a lot of these thoughts and a lot of these schemas and these cognitive mechanisms to understand the world through experience and being taught, especially by our primary caregivers. So that explains why people from different backgrounds tend to have different beliefs, and often people with certain types of belief tends to have certain types of background, because nature or God effectively bring us onto the earth assuming, unfortunately it's not a true assumption, but assuming that we will always have the right guidance. But then some people have the wrong guidance and perhaps end up traumatized or end up suffering severe mental illness as a result of being taught the wrong ideas. So, for example, people who lack secure relationships with their caregivers may suffer attachment trauma later and may have trouble having relationships with other people that operate smoothly because they haven't been taught fundamental relationship skills that can only be learnt through experience. Thankfully, through various types of psychotherapy, we can actually teach those people the skills in their adult life. It's difficult, but it's certainly possible. But we have to understand that we're not bigger than or more wise than Mother Nature or God. Like our minds and bodies work the way they're designed to work. We have to be sympathetic to them. We can't just expect that we can treat them however we want and then expect to function perfectly.
I am friends with liberals and moderates who vehemently disagree with me, and I vehemently disagree with them, but I love them and they love me. We've been friends for over 10, 15 years, and we can coexist. Sometimes they have their little political channel and a little private social media Discord, and they get at it, and I'm like, I can't look at that right now. I can't deal with this. I love them. I respect them. I get where they're coming from. I just vehemently disagree with them. I have the opposite of most people is I'm constantly involved with different communities that I disagree with them on a fundamental level of different things. I'm a conservative with libertarian leanings, and I'm high in openness, which means I'm drawn to more creative stuff. And people who are involved with creative stuff tend to be high in openness and tend to be more liberal. And so I am always constantly in a camp that I don't agree with and they don't agree with me. And so, it's like I want to retreat sometimes and find like-minded people. And I I think I need that, but I also need to keep my friends and coexist with them and understand the relationship is more than just the politics. When is that right and when is that wrong? Want to be in a society, be in community with people you disagree with, whether it be your family members or your network of friends or a group that tends to be more conservative or liberal than you happen to be, but you really love the people. Is that good for us? Is that bad for us? Or is it kind of a mix of both?
That's an excellent question. And to answer it, statistically speaking, I would say people generally need to interact with people different from them a lot more, like significantly more than they already do, because we tend to already gravitate towards people who are like us. And being around people who reflect the ideas which we already hold to be true simply confirm them, but not because of evidence, it confirms them through bias. It's healthy for people to deliberately seek conversation with people who disagree with them. In fact, trying to find people who are the most divergent from them as they possibly can be, and ask them thoughtful questions about how they arrived at their worldviews, and ask them existential questions as well. When does it start to become bad? I think natural law says that. If you know someone who is a closeted murderer, I would say probably speak to your local police department and turn them in. The fact that they are divergent from you is not a good thing, because if you choose not to be a murderer, you have made the right decision. And I encourage you, we both encourage you to continue that lifestyle of not being a murderer or an assailant. Certain types of deviations are naturally bad, and we call them deviations because they're bad. Like, again, being a murderer, being someone who cheats, steals, someone who is willing to exploit other people, someone who's willing to cause destruction in other people's lives. There is an inherent harm in that. There's inherent wrong in it. I'd say as long as we are dealing with the issues that we can't decide objectively, like the issues that are too complex to have a firm and objective answer, like how should we arrange our economy? Should we be more free market capitalist? Should we be more socialist? Or should we be a hybrid of the two? What should be the entrance requirements and study requirements to practice certain types of professions? What sort of treatments for different health conditions are the most appropriate? That's obviously very complicated, but entertaining that there are possibilities there. What sort of relationship arrangements are most healthy? Monogamous, polygamous, polyamorous, non-marital relationships? Do you have a duty to have children? What should be your duty to the animal kingdom? What should be your duty to the environment? And what's actually the reality of our environment? How's it operating? What were someone's intentions in instances where they were ambiguous? In those types of big questions that are hard to decide objectively, I think it's healthy to statistically for people to mix with people who have divergent views because we don't do it enough. There are certain issues where you probably should keep yourself distant from other people who are inextricably going to harm you and harm other people and not enable their behavior. But then ultimately, we were given free will, so we have to accept responsibility for making those choices and then account for the consequences of them.
There are people who are salt of the earth, a spade is a spade, truth speakers, and they can be very diversive, not exactly destructive, but very polarizing. And sometimes that's very, very healthy. It's actually kinder to be more forthright and more upfront and honest. Um, and then there's also this, you know, people like me who are, you know, they're honest but they're more diplomatic. They're more easygoing. They're more, you know, like let's keep the peace kind of thing. And you have these two polar opposites and get along and also stand for what you believe in kind of thing. When is it better to be one of the both or a mix?
It depends on whether those archetypes which you describe, whether we're referring to people who are stereotypically those types, or whether it's their ethos that simply guides the way that they form beliefs. To give an example, a stereotypical salt of the earth type person might be very much a political and religious conservative. That's a stereotype. But if we're talking about that stereotype in real life manifest, many of the tendencies may not be psychologically healthy because, again, a lot of those beliefs may develop from pure convention and from a desire to want to feel right, which would have originated many years ago. Not saying that all religious people are like that, but probably originated from one's family of origin. And I would say that while the values that a person in that position holds may be perfectly adaptive for them, and they shouldn't necessarily change those values for implementation into their own life, the way that they present to other people, I would say try to avoid being divisive, not by ignoring your own beliefs or being willing to forego your own values for the sake of other people's feelings, but more knowing where division becomes destruction, because that line can vary.
Mm.
If you are divisive simply because you speak your mind, but make it clear that you reserve your right to live your life on your terms, but you're not trying to impose your values on other people, if other people find that controversial, that is their choice to find it controversial. But if you are someone who actually wants those beliefs to be implemented to the effect that other people who don't agree with them should either be forced to obey them or be persecuted, then that is destruction, because one day you could well vote for someone who allows that to happen. And then while you still have the natural right to own those beliefs and believe in them and live your life according to them, as I said, there comes a point at which it starts to cause harm to innocent people. I would say that as long as you are someone who has a purpose for holding those values and you're holding them because they are demonstrably, they have virtue in your own life and they help you lead a healthy life, I don't think that's a bad thing. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have opinions or perspectives that violate popular thought in itself, as long as you're holding it with the right intentions, you're holding them to be honest, and you're holding them because you genuinely believe that they have virtue in your own life, or that you want to try and impart that virtue to other people's lives. In terms of how you describe yourself as somebody who firmly holds a set of values, but at the same time is diplomatic, I would say more people who are stereotypically the salt of the earth could actually benefit from being that way. But you also have to be aware of the fact that sometimes the truth isn't pleasant, and even if a truth is uncomfortable, if it's genuinely in people's best interest, people need to hear it. So diplomacy is important to the extent that it helps preserve community, it helps preserve harmony between people where that harmony is beneficial, and where it allows us to foster relationships with others. But it then starts to become counterintuitive when it prevents you from speaking the truth because you're concerned about how someone else might take it. Being concerned about someone else is important. It shows you have empathy. It shows you care about people. But in the end, sometimes the truth is the truth, and you have every right to speak it. And at the same time, especially if it's a truth about someone else's life that they need to hear in order to avoid harm, I would say we should make the truth known, but make it clear I'm speaking this truth not because I want to make you feel uncomfortable, but because I'm concerned that something bad might happen to you if I don't speak it, or I need to protect myself and my own values by being honest about what I think.
That's very helpful. I tend to be more conflict avoidant, but sometimes I'm in, like, with my geek friends. We call ourselves the Geek Family Night, and there's a bunch of geeks involved with sci-fi stuff and role-playing games and all that kind of stuff. And we're sitting around having dinner, and something political or some other controversial topic comes up, and it kind of ebbs and flows and goes away. And I never know right in the moment if I'm actually being conflict avoidant or just going with the flow of the spirit of the evening kind of thing, or if I should have spoke up. So I think I sometimes wrestle with the opposite perspective: is, am I speaking up to speak truth, or am I speaking up because I'm bothered and irritated by what they just said? And I don't know how to always judge that in the moment. Do I say something or not say something? I don't know.
Absolutely. And the fact that you're thinking about that purpose that you have for speaking the truth as you see it shows that you have empathy, and that's an important component of being human. We all need it. If we lack a lack of empathy will cause destruction between relationships. It can also destroy entire societies if it's widespread enough. At the same time, you need to each person has to decide for themselves what their threshold is. You're not obliged to necessarily say something, but at the same time, you also have to account for the consequences of not saying it. At the same time, you may have a right to say something, but you also have to account for the consequences of saying it. And there are plenty of statements that need to be made, but I understand why people choose not to make them, because the zeitgeist and popular thought will effectively persecute them for stating what they believe to be the truth, and they have a valid reason to believe it's the truth. So the great existential problem is that we're the only ones who can truly account for the consequences of our actions. So we have to decide, what are we willing to do? What consequences are we willing to tolerate?
I know sometimes if we suppress what we think, it can be very damaging for us, mentally speaking. It's like I grew up in working in media production for 30 years, and we were conservatives in a very liberal perspective, and people were always bashing conservatives and Christians and stuff for decades. And, we kept quiet about our faith and our beliefs. And with my group of friends, I've become more outspoken and more forthright in what I think. But I also deal with the thing is, like, I find it irritating and frustrating not only having my viewpoint that I do, but being inundated with the opposite perspective in mainstream media, both in entertainment and news, and also with my friends and different online venues like Facebook and stuff, where it's like they're just smacking you right in the face constantly, and you're like, I really don't want to deal with this. And then people get, the algorithm likes the engagement, but it's like, is it really doing good or is it doing harm? Of just picking fights with strangers online. It's like, what's it's like, when is it speaking the truth and when is it just bickering?
I would say the initial reaction that you describe of being bothered by what you see doesn't necessarily indicate that you have the wrong intentions or that you're bickering. What we have to understand is that, again, one of our fundamental psychological needs is to have a sense of assurance, and that's why belief systems evolve, because they provide us with a sense of security. If I believe this, then I'll have a sense of what's right, I'll have a sense of what's wrong, I'll know about the world in a more definite sense than I would otherwise have. I can feel confident within myself. Not to say that they're the wrong intentions, but that's how our minds tend to work. So anything that potentially violates that sense of security, that sense of confidence by presenting an opposing belief, the reaction that we have is practically autonomic in terms of the nervous system and the cognitive response. I wouldn't say that responding to that by speaking an opposing view is necessarily bickering as long as one is aware of, again, the purpose of it. The initial reaction may be what you notice, but just because you have the reaction, it doesn't mean that your purpose is not righteous. It just means that your mind has become accustomed to thinking in a certain way so that violations of it can feel uncomfortable. But as long as you don't take that reaction on face value and you analyze and reflect on, why am I speaking what I'm speaking, and am I doing this because I genuinely believe, it respects both my rights and other people's rights, and because even I may believe that other people would benefit from hearing this, then there's no problem with that in the realms of human existence. Because remember that all of us are human. We are imperfect. We are trying to make sense of a complicated world. And if we set a precedent, and this is one of those examples of asking ourselves what would happen if we extend the precedent of this decision, if we set a precedent that only certain people are allowed to speak and that certain people with certain types of beliefs don't have the right to speak, then if we extend that, eventually it's going to result in the truth being suppressed. It already has in the world, all over the world, and always, and throughout history, it always has. So Valerie, as we've discussed, there is so much virtue in community. We really can't function without it. We see how much benefit people obtain from being with people from the same background, people of different backgrounds, having conversations, and having conversation as an educative goal. It does so much, it's so powerful, and that's why it can't be said often enough that we should encourage people to connect with one another in real life if possible, and have as many conversations as they can, explore uncharted territories, become familiar with other people, and enjoy the virtue of being alive with other people. And I want to say thank you very much for raising this topic of community, because it's evoked so many different ideas from us. And the subject of estuary was fascinating. I loved the way you painted a picture of this type of community that has such a noble goal, that is really powerful to the people who partake in it. So thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been wonderful.
It's been a delight. I really enjoyed our conversations. Thank you so much for inviting me into this collaboration together.
Thank you. And to our audience, thank you to everybody for joining us. If you have any type of feedback for either of us, whether it be an idea about what you'd like to hear on either of our programs, if you'd like to be a guest, a collaborator, if you have feedback, if you would like to suggest that we expound on a particular idea further, or if you disagree with us, please put forth your ideas. Valerie?
Yeah, I'd love to hear. I love talking with people and connecting with people, whether I agree with you or not. I in a Bridges and Meaning community, the conversations are not always agreeable, but they are always amiable. And so, please reach out to me. You can reach out to me at the writersofmeaning.com website, or my personal website, valerieflynn.com.
It has indeed. Links to our respective works will be in the description of this episode. And remember, everybody, if you have concerns about yourself or someone else of any description, please seek advice from a professional or somebody else that you trust. Please do not take anything that you find in the media or on the internet as advice. And until next time, everybody, take care.